Welcome, everybody. Today is Tuesday, April 2nd, and on Tuesdays we have Mr. Dwoskin presenting his In the Headlines lecture series. Mr. Dwoskin, the floor is yours.
Hi, everybody. I just got a news flash. You might not have seen it yet, but it says that Hamas is going to give up, release all the hostages and lay down its arms. And Mr. Netanyahu, in exchange, is going to recognize a Palestinian state. Unfortunately, this is April the 2nd, but if this was April the 1st, I would say April Fools. And that's about as likely, these things are about as likely to happen as any April Fool's joke. I have a few different subjects to speak about today, one of which you may not have heard about. We'll start maybe with that one. And I title it, Finally Some Good News for the Moderate Liberal Camp. And what I'm referring to is municipal elections that were held in Turkey 2 days ago. You might not think that municipal elections are very important, but in some countries, they're very important. Some countries, municipal elections are held on a party line basis, and other countries, many of them, they are not held in that way. In Great Britain, for example, they are held on a party line basis. Not in Canada, not in the United States, not in Israel for the most part, but in Turkey they are, and they serve as a kind of a substitute in a way for the national elections. In Turkey, the municipalities have a lot of power. They have big budgets. They're able to promote education, culture, many other sort of, we'll call them side activities to fixing the roads and collecting garbage. And the results of these elections were a shock to Mr. Erdogan and his AK party, which is an Islamist party. For the second time in a row, they lost the mayorships of Ankara and Istanbul, the two biggest cities in the country. And they lost them by bigger margins than they had before. And in addition, some other smaller cities also went to the opposition party for the first time. And this is the case even though there were many choices in this election. There weren't just like two choices, there were several different choices. And the second place party, the former ruling party of Turkey for so many years, the CHP party, which is a kind of a secular liberal type party, they won in cities that they haven't won in a very long time. So it does show this dissatisfaction with Mr. Erdogan's rule. It shows a lack of fear in choosing an opposition party. It also shows that, at least on the municipal level, the Turkish elections are quite fair and clean. And it also promotes the possibility that the mayor of Istanbul, or in second, maybe the mayor of Ankara, could run for president the next time around, the next time national elections are held. So it was a definitely disappointing day for the ruling party, Mr. Erdogan, his AK party as it's called, and also kind of a victory for the more liberal, small L liberal and moderate and secular portion of Turkish society, which is very large, and especially in the cities. We have been subject to a kind of a constant, unfortunate, I would say unfortunate for those who support a moderate point of view, but it seems like radical parties have been in the ascendancy in Europe and other places, and here you've got an example of the opposite happening. So that was a really good piece of news. Remember that Istanbul has The population of Istanbul is 20 million, meaning it's got half of Canada in this one big city and its suburbs. So it's not an insignificant number of people who vote. And it also represents a cross-section of all of Turkey because so many immigrants from other parts of Turkey come to live in Istanbul for the job opportunities and educational opportunities that it really does represent the sort of cross-section of the whole country. The reasons why Mr. Erdogan did not do well probably have to do more with an economic picture that Turkey is in right now. It's a picture of high inflation, where prices are going up faster than wages, where there is a lot of economic instability with the value of the Turkish money dropping pretty well faster than any other currency in the world. I won't say any other currency, but pretty well any other currency of major significance. And, those two things together lead to insecurity, economic insecurity for sure, because people don't know, when they'll ever be able to catch up. They don't know if they should buy something now, even if they don't need it, because the price will go up later. They are not able to buy imported goods or travel abroad so easily because all those prices are in US dollars and their money is falling faster and their wages are going up. So, this sort of an economic loop, vicious circle type of thing is something that affects every Turkish person, except for the ultra wealthy friends of the president. And so this might explain the results of the election. We can't dismiss Turkey at all because it's still a very important country. It's a NATO power. It voted recently to allow Finland and Sweden to join NATO. It's a middle ground between Ukraine and Russia. It is a big player in Middle Eastern politics. It is occupying a part of Syria in the north. It's still home to 3 million Syrian refugees who are becoming more and more unpopular as the costs to accommodate them continue to go up. It's 100% has sided with Hamas in this conflict with Israel. And it may well be, possibly, I'm not saying it was, but it's possible that the vote against Mr. Erdogan in part was to maybe express dissatisfaction with that stance. I don't think it's possible, but you never know. That's just a bit of, we'll call it good news for people who are supporting a moderate, small L liberal outlook in politics. And there haven't been many of these type of victories at this point. We know that there have been some. I won't say there aren't any of them, but Mr. Bolsonaro in Brazil was kicked out by a more moderate presidential candidate, Mr. De Silva. And, there are examples like that around, but, there are many more. The other example that comes to mind is the elections in Poland, where the right-wing government was thoroughly trounced in the last national elections. But there is still a trend for people, and especially young people, and especially young men, to vote for right-wing parties because of a feeling of loss, a feeling of powerlessness, a feeling of a loss of hope, and going to what's called an easy solution. I'm going to let's see now. Let's see. Yeah, on this subject, let's stick on this subject for a minute, sorry, before we move to some other subjects. But the American political contest is in full swing, as we know. Interestingly enough, some polls have just been published this week showing that in a percentage vote, the two candidates are exactly tied, meaning Biden and Trump. They're each at 45% of the vote. If that were the case, let's say that's how it would end up, Trump would still win the election because too many of Democratic votes are concentrated in states which are already safe for the Democrats. The Republican votes are more spread out a bit. So it means that if the percentage was tied, then the Republicans would win the election. Remember that in the last election, not the last one, but the first one that Trump won, he actually got fewer votes than Hillary Clinton, and he still won the election. So, but the trend seems to be for the last month that the Democrats are picking up more support than the Republicans are. But still, let's come back to the question that I mentioned before. Why the pollsters are showing two discouraging trends for the Democrats. One is that young people in general are not as enthusiastic about them as they used to be. The other one is that Blacks and Hispanic people, meaning people who are of Spanish-speaking origin, are also moving away from the Democrats. And these two population groups were their, solid sources of support for many elections past. And the question is, of course, why is this happening? It's a question that has to be resolved or solved or looked at if the Democrats hope to gain back some of these voters. And on the other hand, if the Republicans want to sort of increase their percentage, they also have to figure out why they are gaining support from these more unlikely groups of supporters. And the reasoning and the differences are the explanations, I should say, are kind of different ones, but all worth looking into. The one for the Hispanics is a bit more easy to explain and to talk about. And first of all, we have to remember that Hispanics are the single largest ethnic minority in the United States. There are more Hispanics in the United States than there are Canadians in Canada. So that tells you the size and the number of these people and what an important voting bloc they are. But it's important to mention that they really aren't a voting bloc, that these people are just as different from each other as regular non-Hispanic citizens are in the United States. Some of them are recent arrivals, some have been here for generations, some are poor, some are wealthy, some are very religious Catholics, some are very religious evangelical Protestants. And so all of these differences explain why this group can't be taken as a whole, can't be taken for granted, can't be spoken to with one voice. That as these people integrate into American society, as generations change over from one generation to the other, they become much more similar to the average American than when they first came to the country clearly as outsiders. So many of them, after 2 or 3 generations, don't feel any more like outsiders. They don't feel like immigrants. They don't feel that they have to support the same causes that those who just come over the border support. And, some of them also come from or originate from countries which are ruled by communistic type dictators like in Venezuela or Cuba. So these people in particular will, support right-wing causes because they've been so harmed by left-wing dictators. And that will include Nicaragua also. So we've got three countries right off the bat: Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, whose immigrants are definitely on the Republican side. Um, for for uh, for the other group, for blacks, it's a much more difficult type of explanation. And I've just finished reading so many different articles about this, some of which doubt the statistics are true, some of which say that there haven't been really much movement at all of blacks to Trump, but there was some in the last election. Um, uh, and kind of, you could look at the same type of explanation in that there are more people nowadays, black people even, for whom their blackness is not the most important part of their lives. You saw Tom Scott, the senator from South Carolina, who ran for the leadership of the Republican Party and who might be picked as a vice presidential candidate by Trump. He says, "Look, I'm black, but being black is not the whole part of my life. I'm also, a professional. I'm a father. I'm, whatever else his identity comes to." So there are some black people like that who just don't see themselves as sort of holding the flag for all blacks in America, and therefore, whatever political tendency they might support would be more going along with their interests. So, if you were, a wealthy person and you want less taxes, you might say, well, I want to support the Republican Party for that reason. If you are doubting of climate change, and if you're a strong supporter of guns, or you're a strong anti-abortionist, you might support the Republicans for that reason, even if you are black. So you get that idea. But there is one group of people for whom there is a definite sort of change in the offing, and that is young men. It used to be in politics all around the world, including in Canada, that sort of the older you got, the more conservative you got. And the younger you were, the more liberal you were, because young people are idealistic. Young people don't have so many responsibilities. Young people don't have to worry about being taxed to support other members of society. Whereas on the other hand, older people are more conservative because their social values are more conservative, because they want to take fewer chances and risks. And this is just a natural progression of how people's views change over a lifetime. Certainly in the last election, the people under 35 as an age group were the strongest supporters of the Democratic Party. And it's similarly true pretty well in all countries, including in Canada, that, the NDP will get more of its support from younger voters than from older voters. But all of a sudden, we do see a change in that picture. The pollsters are showing us that there is a change in that picture. And what's so interesting is that there is a very big division between men and women in that political stream. That women are much, much less likely to support conservative parties, and young women and young men are much more likely to do that than young women are. And so you'd have to ask yourself why that is. That's curious, but the facts are the facts. And why do we think that's a possibility? And what the pollsters are showing is that if you actually look at the numbers of women who are in universities, in colleges, in professions, in employment, that their numbers are far higher than the numbers of men, young men in the same fields. So in other words, there's a greater percentage of women are enrolled in university than men are. A greater percentage of women are enrolled in other colleges than men are. A greater percentage of women are graduating universities than men are. And this leads to women getting better jobs. It also leads to women in generally preferring men who are on a social status that are equal to themselves, and not people who are below themselves. So what that means is that that group of non-college educated men, people who are growing up with maybe even not even a high school diploma, or whose job prospects are limited because of their lack of education. These people are not equal to the number of women in society. And they say that they are being rejected as a sort of marriage material by women who are further advanced in their education and careers than they are. So this being the case, then they are kind of depressed, they are insecure. And when you have young people who are insecure and depressed, they aren't going to go vote for a liberal, moderate party. They're going to vote for somebody who tells them it's not your fault. It's not, you haven't done anything wrong. It's all the migrants' fault. It's all the different minority groups' fault. I can help you. And it's easy, you could see how easy it is for them to be attracted to some sort of charismatic populist, because that charismatic populist is offering simple, easy to understand solutions and blaming somebody else and not them for their own bad situation in society. And so it's very, the polls show so clearly how young men without college degrees are the strongest supporters of Mr. Trump, and vice versa, young women with college degrees are the smallest supporters of Mr. Trump. The statistics are so completely evident and clear. And this doesn't really matter. I mean, it matters which part of the country they come from, but the statistics are the same no matter which part of the country they come from, that gap. The gap. And if you feel left out, if you feel that the country is not working for you, if you feel that you don't have a leg up in society, that the so-called elites are ones running the country, you want to take revenge on these kind of people, and you've got somebody like Mr. Trump who says, I can, solve all your problems in one day. I can do this by stopping imports, putting tariffs on foreign goods that will then encourage manufacturing, and manufacturing jobs are what these people, young people without a degree, what they kind of would look forward to. By keeping immigrants out, he said, well, these immigrants are working harder than you and they're taking your jobs, and that's why you're sitting at home on the couch. And if we keep out immigrants and if we keep out foreign goods, your lives will improve. Of course, in a practical way, these are not true, and they've been proven not to be true time after time. But it's an easy sell to people who are otherwise at a loss as to why their situation in society is so down. The other, of course, reason why young women would be supportive of the Democrats is the whole abortion issue, and that's one which will prove to be, I think, quite a strong one for that party. And men, by definition, are just not as interested in that subject as women are. So it's another reason to explain the gap between the two genders in the elections. Now, the last election that took place, women were somewhere around 7 or 8% more likely to vote for the Democrats. than the Republicans. And I think, this upcoming election in November will probably be the same, if not even with a bigger gender gap. So the if the Democrats want to get more votes, they have to get a message out to young people that it's a young sort of lower economic class people that the Republicans offer them no real solutions to their problems. That the Democrats, by promising national health care, by promising help for them to get work, by the billions of dollars sunk into this sort of the new green movement, creating all kinds of jobs all over the place in electricity production and transmission, in retrofitting buildings, in changing over heating systems. That all of these things could appeal to young men in order to sort of lift them up in society. But culturally, it's a very hard sell. And it's much easier to put on a big hat, put on a big cowboy hat, or wear cowboy boots and say, look, I'm a tough guy, and Trump is a tough guy, so I'm with him. So that's a bit of a kind of a peek into where some of the trends are going now in the American political sphere. Needless to say, because we are so close to them and because their media are just so powerful, that there are many people in Canada who are in a way more familiar with American politics than they are with Canadian politics, just because American TV and all the other social media are so strong and so present everywhere. So let me just see now. So let's shift then to a Canadian political subject, completely one which was, brand new, we'll say. I don't know about you, but I, who live in Cote-Saint-Luc, got a call from a polling company. And the polling company asked the following questions. It said, who did you vote for in the last election? Who do you think would be the best prime minister? And if Anthony Housefather ran as a conservative, would you vote for him? So I think that probably, these three questions together form a sort of a poll on do people in the Mount Royal riding, would they support Anthony Housefather if he became a conservative? So let's look at where all of this comes from. As we know, Anthony Housefather has represented the Mount Royal riding since Irwin Cotler retired. He's been a very popular member of parliament. He's been re-elected a few different times, not with the same majorities as Irwin Cotler had, but still with a very considerably good majority, considering all the different parties running these days for parliament. His first brush with opposition to the current Liberal government came with the issue discussing should the Canadian government give backing or recognition to the changes in the language laws demanded by the CAQ government, particularly the issue of making Bill 101 apply to federally provided services in Quebec, which are currently under the national law, which says that services have to be bilingual. Remember that all the other parties, the NDP, the Conservatives, the Bloc Québécois, all voted against this idea. I mean to say for the idea, for that recognition. The Liberals were kind of stuck a little bit wishy-washy about that whole issue. They basically were like people who don't want to put their foot in a hot water or bathtub. And uh, Anthony Housefather found it very frustrating to convince the Liberals that the minority rights in Quebec needed a strong defense and not just a passive defense. The next issue came, of course, up just recently when the government agreed with an NDP motion to call for a ceasefire in Gaza and the release of the hostages. And Mr. Housefather, like at the beginning, felt that this motion should be defeated. And then when the government said, no, 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 we'll change the motion to make it more neutral, the government passed the motion, and Mr. Housefather and Mr. Mendocino and Mr. Carr, 3 Liberals dissented, voted against it. We already remember that Mr. Housefather was demoted from his job as a parliamentary secretary and was only restored to it, after considerable lobbying. And the fact that the pollsters are asking this question means that Mr. Housefather himself must be thinking about his future, as he said he was going to do. And people are just testing the waters to see, what the results would be. The polls that are taken are showing that whether Mr. Housefather changes parties or not, he would still get reelected as a member of parliament. But if he changed parties to the Conservatives, he'd get even more votes than he would get currently sitting as a Liberal. The polls also show that the Conservatives at this point are going in strong position to win the next election. We have to remember, however, that the next election is not tomorrow. It's not November like the American elections are. But barring a fall of the government, because remember, the government is a minority government, that elections are scheduled for 2025. And a lot can happen between now and 2025, things that we have no way of predicting or knowing, as we saw with the Russian war in Ukraine or the Gaza war in Israel. I mean, things just happen that, can end up affecting our lives, but we have no control over. Still, it's an interesting poll and an interesting question. And Mr. Housefather, who you might remember was a Hampstead City Councillor, was a mayor of Cote-Saint-Luc, is a very popular political personality certainly in the Hampstead Cote-Saint-Luc area, and his electoral victories also included other parts of the riding, like in town of Mount Royal or Snowdon. So, he is popular everywhere in the in the riding. There is a question that I'd like to ask you, and you could ask yourselves also, that in our system, when you vote both for an individual and for a political party. So if a person changes parties before an election, is this a fair way of respecting the voters who voted for this person as a Liberal, and then this person could end up being another party? Was the vote an individual vote for the person, or was it just a vote for the party, no matter who is running for that party? It's always a combination of both of these factors. Sometimes one is much more important than the other one, but it's one where it's legitimate to say that if you want to change parties, maybe the right thing to do would be to resign your seat altogether. And then when a by-election is held or another election is held, you can run for the other party. And then there's no idea of sort of switching sides against the will of the electors who voted for you. It's certainly not unknown in Canadian politics and not unknown in world politics for politicians to change sides. We had a case, ironically, with one of the most pro-Palestinian of all liberals in the Liberal caucus, changed from being a Green Party to a Liberal Party. And so now if Mr. Housefather changes, it'll be the most pro-Israel person in the caucus leaving, and you have the most pro-Palestinian one, which came in, on the previous election. I find that to talk about Israel, in their system, you don't vote for an individual at all. There are no individuals' names on any ballot. You just vote for a political party, and then these people get elected to the Knesset. But it's been certainly the case many, many times that once these people get elected, they change parties. Now, to me, this is thoroughly dishonorable because no one ever voted for these people. They just voted for the political party, and they happen to be high enough on the list to be able to get elected. So, in my view, changing parties in that system should never be allowed. At least in our system, where the name of the candidate is on the ballot, an argument could be made that you elected that person, and that person is now allowed to use his or her conscience to decide whether to stay with that party or not. Needless to say, the argument could be made, well, if the person does change parties, then the electorate has a chance to say, okay, I approve what you did or I don't approve what you did in the following election. So that argument is also a good one, provided that the person actually runs again and not, retires or decides not to run again. But if you think of it, if it's true that the Conservatives will win the next election, then Mr. Housefather has a lot more to gain by joining the Conservatives and being in a ruling party than by staying with the Liberals and being with just an opposition status in the House of Commons. So, it could well be that, if he ever decides to change, it might benefit him from a professional point of view, and he might be appointed, to some high job in the government when the Conservative Party gets elected, if and when the Conservative Party gets elected. Excuse me 1 second, I just want to turn down my air conditioning. Sorry about that. On the very same subject, you might have seen, I'm sure you did, or heard the leader of the Conservative Party come to a synagogue in Cote-Saint-Luc, the Beth Israel Synagogue, Rabbi Pupko Synagogue, to give a resoundingly pro-Israeli speech, maybe setting the table for Mr. Anthony Housefather to change sides. So it could be that this was a sort of a coordinated activity, or it could have been a kind of we'll call it an inducement for Anthony to change sides, having seen what Mr. Poilievre's attitude is on this particular issue. One or the other is the truth. I'm not sure which one, of course. But Mr. Poilievre, as a candidate, has as much as people dislike Mr. Trudeau, roughly about the same number of people dislike Mr. Poilievre. Neither of them have captured the imagination of the Canadian voter at this point, even though the Conservatives are well ahead in the polls, as I was mentioning before. It also should be noted that the Arab and Muslim constituent constituency. In other words, the number of people of Arab or Muslim descent in Canada is 4 times the amount of the Jewish ones. And they certainly are a voting bloc, not that all of them are involved with this particular issue, but somehow or other people get pushed to take sides. And the vast majority, polls are showing, of the Arab and Muslim voters in Canada are not in favor of the Israeli government's attitude, are not in favor of the way the war is being carried out in Israel. And, possibly should Mr. Poilievre be so outspoken on this issue as he was in the synagogue, that he could lose a lot more votes from that group of people than he could gain from the Jewish voters. So politicians are always there to make these sort of decisions, make these calculations. And, they often do speak with different voices to different audiences. And that wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. That was the case here. But I just wanted to bring up this telephone call that I got from this polling company, which was such a surprise. Asking me if I would change, if I would vote for Anthony Housefather if he were to change to be a conservative. So it must mean, if they're asking the question, that people are thinking about this particular issue. Now let me just check my time here. Okay, we got time. Let me just see what I had over here. This we covered. This we covered. Let's just talk just a little bit again about the ongoing war in the Middle East, because new elements seem to creep into it every single day. And the accidental killing of these world famous chefs and providers of food to the refugees in Gaza made news all around the world. And if you checked out the websites of BBC and pretty well every one of the world's major newspapers, you will all find out that Israel killed 7 people with a drone. These people were also citizens of 7 different countries. And so therefore, all kinds of governments are now involved in trying to, ask Israel, what did you do? And how come you didn't know that these were our people, and all this type of thing. The criticism got so loud that Israel, for once, admitted they made a mistake. They said, we're checking into it. We will never do it again. And we're sorry, etc., etc. Of course, the question, it kind of brings to light several different things. First of all, that the publicity war, or the propaganda war, or the informational war on this whole battleground is definitely being lost by Israel. That if you look at the headlines of any of the major Western news organizations, if they're talking about the war in Gaza, obviously the subject is the suffering of the Gazan people. And in this incident, in this case, the incident that just happened yesterday. Now, part of this reason, and this is a curious one, is that Israel does not allow foreign correspondents to accompany its soldiers in the Gaza battlefield. Whereas, on the other hand, Hamas has all kinds of foreign reporters who are brought to the scene or on the scene when something happens, and they are, of course, encouraged to report what they see. And what they see is destruction and the starvation and the killing of children and destruction of homes, and it's all evident there for the world to see. So the question to ask is, well, why doesn't Israel allow foreigners to report from their side? Because that, I would think, would do a lot to alleviate the bad press that Israel is getting all around the world. And there's two possible explanations for this. Explanation number one is that Israel just doesn't trust any of the reporters to be embedded with their soldiers because they have no idea what these reporters will report. There's a chance that the reporters might be agents of the other side and might be sort of spying on the Israeli military for Hamas. So there's one issue. And the lack of control of what these reporters say is, of course, is another issue, because the last thing that Israel wants is to have their own foreign reporters embedded with them to tell a story that the Israelis don't want to come out. So, that is explanation number one. Explanation number two is sort of what I just said, which is that Israel is, clearly making mistakes in the war, either mistakes or not mistakes. And they don't want foreign reporters there on the scene to be putting a microphone in front of a soldier's face to say, why did you just kill these people? They were civilians. So for that reason, then, there are no foreign reporters who are telling the story of the war from the Israeli side. And this is an explanation as to why Hamas is winning the publicity war, the propaganda war, call it what you want. The Israelis may have something to hide in the way that they are pursuing the war, and they don't want foreign reporters there on the ground to say that. Even Israeli reporters who are joining up with the troops, they have all their stories are being vetted by the military censor to make sure that the message that they are giving to the Israeli public is one that the army wants to give. The other notable thing is that if you watch Israeli TV, they don't show any of the suffering or destruction that's going on in Gaza. They only report on the actions of the Israeli military themselves in how they are pursuing and killing the Hamas people. They show pictures of the tunnels. They show pictures of guns. They show pictures of money, which is found, in hiding. They show pictures of the Hamas people hiding in civilian areas. So they show a message which is the one which the government wants the people to get. What they don't show are, those same images that we see on international TV of children, running to get a few scraps, of people starving, of people, being forced to leave their homes, of certainly of women and children being killed. The estimation is that 70% of the casualties in the Hamas war on the Palestinian side were women and children. So, one can assume sort of a priori that these people were not directly involved in the Hamas attacks on Israel. May have been supporters, but they aren't involved. The other thing that the reporters don't report on the Hamas side is opposition to Hamas within the Palestinian people. And there's plenty of evidence to show that the Palestinian people living in Gaza do not support Hamas, do not support the war. If they supported the war at the beginning, they don't support it now that they see what the consequences are. And they also don't report that a lot of the foreign aid which is being distributed to the Palestinian people is being stolen either by Hamas or by armed gangs and sold on the black market. I was reading today that the prices for things like basic vegetables are enormous on the black market, like 50 shekels a kilo for potatoes, which is something that is so high that Israelis themselves couldn't afford it, never mind people living on a few pennies a day. So it is a kind of a media war going on at the same time as there's a physical war. And definitely the Hamas is winning the media war. And by winning the media war, they are instructing and teaching foreign governments not to support Israel. And therefore, the actual practical effect of winning this war is that countries are pulling back from Israel. You saw the United States abstained from a vote condemning Israel's conduct of the war. The president of Spain today said he was going to recognize a Palestinian state before July, and there's a lot of different countries who are moving in that direction. So, this is, in a certain sense, inevitable, you could say. You could make the argument that once Israel went into Gaza, that this is inevitable, that it would happen. But you could also make the argument that it wasn't inevitable, that the attitude of the government that the Palestinians are not a people, the Palestinians are not worth anything, that the only good Arab is a dead Arab, that we don't care about civilian casualties on the other side. All of these attitudes sort of work their way into the psyche of the soldiers, the psyche of their commanders, and then the results are what the results are. And, the world is there to see. Um, but of course, Israel is not a state that censors foreign news. So even though Israeli TV doesn't show the pictures of Palestinian suffering, anybody could look on YouTube or look on Google and find it for themselves. But there is a difference that, they'd have to go out looking for it, whereas what's presented on the news every day just ends up in your living room. Also, what was kind of interesting, and I saw this also, this apropos this war, but not directly directed to it, was that Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas, or one of the heads of Hamas. Remember, Hamas is a complicated organization. It's a political organization. It's a military organization. The political leaders don't even live in Gaza. They live in Turkey, or they live in United Arab Emirates, or they live in Qatar. But Mr. Haniyeh is definitely considered perhaps the chief executive, we'll call it, of the Hamas. But he's got sisters who live in Israel, who are Israeli citizens. And he's got grandchildren, some of whom have fought in the IDF, in the Israeli Defense Forces. If you think of that as being ironic, it is ironic. And the reason that I'm telling you this is because I saw that the Israelis just arrested one of his sisters in the Negev who had what they called terrorist propaganda, and were planning to do things to support Hamas and this type of thing. So she was just arrested for that. So, when you think of all these family ties, and Mr. Haniyeh has had untold relatives, nieces, nephews, grandchildren who've been treated in Israeli hospitals for treatments that were not available in Gaza. So it's just, all of this is just a bit of irony in this whole in this whole affair. The other news of the day was that Israel bombed a Iranian consul in Syria. Now, I believe that it was in Damascus. So my question was, how do you have a consulate in the same city as you would have an embassy? But that's a whole other question that could be looked at. But what they did was they killed several very important commanders in the Iranian exterior military force, the IGRC as it's called. And Iran is now calling on revenge on Israel for doing this. And the way Iran could avenge Israel is by its own proxies, by its own friends, either the Houthis in Yemen, who just shot a missile at Eilat, where they just recovered some remains of a plane in Eilat, or more likely with the Hezbollah on the Lebanese front, where the war has been at a low grade ever since the beginning of the Gaza war, but whose capabilities are far greater than what they've shown. And this could really lead to sort of an opening of a second front against Israel in order to avenge the attacks and the killing of these commanders. Right now, this is all up to Iran. Iran may or may not have direct control over what the Hezbollah or the Houthis do. They have influence, but I don't know if they have complete control. And it would be up to the leaders of Hezbollah anyway to decide should they go along with what Iran wants or not. But it's definitely another chapter in this this conflict, and it goes to show in general how once you have a conflict in one place, how easy it is to spread to other places. We've seen that pretty well all around the world. Maybe I'll close off by saying that the enormous demonstrations against the government in Israel, which were suspended when the Hamas war started, have restarted again because the vast majority of Israelis are so fed up with the way Mr. Netanyahu is running the country, is running the war, is losing friends all around the world, that hundreds of thousands of people have shown up to demonstrate in Tel Aviv to ask for a ceasefire and the freedom of the hostages. Supposedly there are negotiations going on, but these negotiations have been going on for months and months and months already. The other big issue, which is the deadline has passed April 1st, we just did yesterday, was the deadline for the beginning of the drafting of ultra-Orthodox yeshiva students in Israel and the suspension of money given to their yeshivas by the government. Of course, the ultra-Orthodox are the main pillar of Netanyahu's coalition, and he cannot figure out a way how to sort of square the circle, meaning not draft the students, continue giving money to the yeshivas when the courts have said that this is now not permissible. So he's been scrambling around trying to delay, trying to get other delays, but the deadline is already passed. So now is the time to sort of put up or shut up. The ultra-Orthodox have threatened to leave the coalition if ultra-Orthodox people are drafted, but the vast majority of Israelis, of course, want them drafted because the situation is so unfair, where they don't have to risk anything, they don't have to sacrifice, they can continue to lead normal lives while everybody else's lives are being torn upside down. So the inherent unfairness of it is what gets people. And now that there is a much larger proportion of religious Orthodox soldiers in the army, their supporters are saying, well, how come they have to go and not the ultra-Orthodox ones? So even the religious Zionist people are supporting the draft for the ultra-Orthodox students, and even some more. What's the second question? Angela.
Yeah, sorry.
Closed caption B. Yeah.
Do you think Robert F. Kennedy's support will give the election to the Republicans like Nader in 2000?
That's a great question. That's a super question. Really, of course, the answer is nobody knows for sure, but you're asking what my opinion is. Right now, what it seems as if that he would be taking more support from the Democrats than he would be taking from the Republicans. And the couple of reasons for this. One, of course, is that he is a Kennedy with a Kennedy name. The second is that his vice presidential pick, Miss Shanahan, was a strong Democratic contributor, ultra wealthy woman who is the one who bankrolled Mr. Kennedy in the first place. So, I guess it's kind of logical that he would pick her as a vice presidential candidate. He doesn't. He is putting himself in position to try to get votes from people who don't like either of the two main candidates. So that is clear. People are looking for an alternative option. His political kind of viewpoints are mixed all over the place. So it's not really clear, except for him being an anti-vaccine person. He doesn't have a pull to one side or the other for economic or any other types of social issues. It's also not clear that he'll be able to get on the ballot in many states. Each state has its own laws, its own regulations as how you get on the ballot, how many signatures you need, when they have to be filed, what type of organization you need to present yourself as a candidate. And he will not be able to get on the ballot even in many of the states. Still, if you go back to the Bush-Gore election, which was won by so few votes, by 500 votes in Florida to be exact, that third-party candidates, and especially Ralph Nader in that day, or even if you look at the Hillary Clinton-Trump election, the first one, the Jill Stein, who ran as a Green Party candidate, she got more than the difference of votes in some of the key states. So it's definitely a possibility that he could draw votes away from the Democrats more than the Republicans. Whether it will make a difference, it's hard to say, of course, at this point. The polls are showing him with very high numbers which I believe are unrealistically high, in the teens, as percentages. But I think it just shows how so many people in the United States are not happy with either candidate. And so they just look at who else is left, and, it's Kennedy, and so they'll pick him. It remains to be seen. I personally met one of his campaigners on the street in Palm Beach, and he was waving, posters and campaign stuff and calling people to support Kennedy, but he wasn't getting a lot of attention. But it means that he's got enough money to pay people to go out there and bang the drum. So it's an ongoing. The question is a good one. It's going to be an ongoing story. I think that as the election campaign heats up and people will see the clear choice between the two main candidates, that will tend to squeeze out the third-party candidates, simply because those people, there are more people who will vote against Trump than there are people who will vote for Biden. And the more people realize how unsatisfactory Trump is as a candidate, the more people will say, okay, well, Biden is not that bad, and they'll end up voting for him. Polls were showing up until recently that Trump was ahead. And as I said to you, my audience before, I thought that Biden will win the election, and I still do. But now the polls are starting to turn around to make it more equal. So perhaps this is a trend we'll have to see in the next little while.
Okay. Anonymous attendee also says the previous question was about the youth supporting Hamas and being anti-Israel, and not yourself.
Oh, I misheard you and youth. Sorry for that. I'm sorry for that. I heard you when you said youth. My hearing is not the world's greatest, as many people know. I don't, I don't really, that's such a good point. I wouldn't say that the youth are supporting Hamas per se. What I would say is that, as many people have written, and I just finished reading an interview like this, that many people divide the world into the underdogs and the oppressors, and you young people in general will take this side of who they feel are the underdog. And in this case, in this war, clearly the Hamas is being seen as the underdog because the Israelis have complete military superiority on in the field. And like I said before, the pictures being sent back by the international news organizations make it practically impossible not to sympathize with the victims in this case. And I think that Israel did a particularly bad job after the October 7th massacre and rape not to publicize in even stronger detail the effects of those attacks. Now, it's of course it's up to the international news organizations to decide what they want to cover and what they don't want to cover. And for them, perhaps those attacks were old news once Israel started to retaliate. So it does come down to that. The statistics and the polls are showing that in general, certainly in the United States and in Canada, when asked to choose which side do they pick, most people will choose the side of Israel over Hamas. But it's also true that young people are the least likely ones to do this. And it's because of, like I said, the first of all, the lack of detailed knowledge of what's really happening and the natural tendency to side with the underdog. And the Palestinians have promoted themselves as being in the same league as indigenous people in Canada or indigenous people in the United States or black people in the United States. They've been involved in Black Lives Matter for a long time. And so this sort of natural intersectionality type coalition forms itself, and it's not so easy to separate one element from another. So that's why if you are in favor of all the progressive type causes, whether they're indigenous rights or black rights or gay rights or any other rights, to shove Palestinian rights onto that pile is a very easy thing to do because Palestinians have been working carefully at it to make sure that those causes get aligned with each other. And Israel's again, I would blame Israel simply because the leadership of that country is so radical and so right wing that it's very easy for youth who look at things from a certain perspective to say, well, okay, you know, if settlers are burning down Palestinian villages and uprooting Palestinian olive trees, who are the people that we're going to support? Those masked, settlers, or the Palestinians who have no defense? And that's, you know, an unfortunate consequence of the government's policies in Israel.
I have one more question, and this is again from anonymous attendee. And the question is Housefather looking for a cabinet position with the Conservatives?
It's a great question. I don't know, but I'll bet that he would be, in weighing his decision of what to do, since he clearly doesn't have a position in the Liberal government and has been, even put back from a minor position. That I don't know if Mr. Pauly ever promised him anything, but the likelihood, in my opinion, is that he would promise Mr. Housefather something because very likely in a next election, if Mr. Housefather runs as a conservative, it's quite possible that if he wins a seat, it will be the only one in Montreal going to the Conservatives. But remember that in the past, Pierre Fondallard with Jerry Wiener was a Conservative seat, and could be again for all you know. But certainly he would be in a very, very small minority of Conservatives in Montreal, probably the only one. So it's logical to have Montreal's, the Canada's second biggest city, represented in the cabinet. And if you only have one candidate, he's the one to be selected. He certainly is qualified from the point of view of experience and of knowledge and of his time served in the House of Commons. He certainly is eligible to be a cabinet minister as much as anyone else is. So my short answer would be yes, that he is considering that if he does change, that he could be a cabinet minister. But I don't know what he's thinking. I think we'll find out soon, by the way.
I don't see anything else yet.
Okay. Well, you know what? I'm so glad that you got me back on, because I said, "Hey, what's going on?" And I emailed you, so you got back to me, so that worked out really well. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I want to thank everybody for asking such good questions. I want to excuse myself for not hearing one of them so well. And I want to thank you, Angela, for being such a great host. And we'll see you all next week.
Thank you, Mr. Dwoskin, and thank you to everyone listening over the telephone and online. And I don't think it's your hearing. I think I said youth and you sounds too close together. So it probably me saying youth that got you mixed up. So it's okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much
Thanks
and
again.
see you guys
Okay.
next week.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. So you heard that?